This is the video lecture for Lesson 27 in Clayton Croy's A Primer to Biblical Greek. In this lesson, we will discuss the interrogative and indefinite pronouns and adjectives, relative pronouns and their uses, and the unique verb oida. To begin with, interrogative and indefinite pronouns and adjectives. Both of these are declined according to third declension nouns. That is to say, they are similar to some of the nouns we learned later in this class. You must know that the interrogative and the indefinite forms are identical in form, with the exception of the accent. And so in general, in addition to paying attention to the accent, you'll want to look to context to distinguish between the interrogative and the indefinite. The interrogative are used in questions. So an interrogative pronoun we would usually translate in English as who. For an interrogative adjective, we would translate as what or which. And if you see T standing alone, often this indicates the question why. With indefinite pronouns and adjectives, the pronoun will be translated something like someone or something, and the adjective will be translated as certain or some. Here are the forms of the interrogative pronouns and adjectives. Again, these are the ones that are used in questions. You'll notice that the forms follow very broadly the pattern of the third declension nouns. And so what you are going to want to do is to use other markers in the sentence as clues to distinguish both the gender and the case, as well as the singular or the plural. And please note that with these forms, there is no distinction between the masculine and the feminine, as indicated by that first column in both charts. So let's take an example first of the pronoun. Tis didaske ta tekna. You'll notice the semicolon at the end, which indicates this is a question. So we know that the tis there, in addition to the special accent, is an interrogative pronoun. And so we would translate this as who is teaching. Next, let's have an example of the adjective. Ti biblion thele he gune. Once again, notice the semicolon indicating the question. And we would translate this as what or which book does the woman want? So ti here is an adjective modifying biblion. It's not standing in the place of a noun as in a pronoun, but it is modifying a noun, biblion. So which book does the woman want? Here are the forms of the indefinite pronouns and adjectives. Once again, broadly they follow the third declension nouns, and you'll see that the accent has shifted slightly. In the nominative singular, you'll notice there are no accents, but in the interrogative pronouns and adjectives, there is an accent there. Now here is an example of the pronoun. Ean tis epe humes accusate. So if someone speaks, you will listen. So this is not a question, this is a statement. So we're going to use not an interrogative, but the indefinite. And here the pronoun is standing in for some other noun. Ean tis epe, if someone speaks. And here is an example of the adjective. Hierus tis ein en tini pole. Again, this is not a question. There's no interrogative usage, but it's an adjective. So tis is modifying hierus, which means priest, and tini is modifying pole. And you'll notice that tini is in the dative singular case because it's modifying pole, which is also in the dative singular case because it follows that preposition en. So we would translate this as a certain priest was in a certain city. So here, tis is being used to modify, to specify which priest and which city. The second major part of this lesson concerns relative pronouns. And the things that we need to know about relative pronouns in the beginning are these things. First, that they are declined according to the first and second declension. That should make you feel good. These are the declensions that we learned way back when. They're the ones that we've been working with the most in this class, and so that should help you. The forms of the relative pronouns are broadly similar to the definite article, minus the tau in all of the forms but the nominative case, right? So if you've got that definite article chart in your head, recognizing relative pronouns will not be that difficult as long as you understand that tau might drop off, that first tau might drop off. So relative pronouns are going to agree in number and gender with their antecedent. However, they will not necessarily agree with their antecedent in case, because case will be determined by the syntax of its clause or by its place in that special clause. And another general warning is that sometimes that rule that I just gave you has some exceptions, because sometimes the case can be attracted. That means it changes to a genitive or a dative case, even though grammatically it might be supposed to take a different case, maybe the accusative case, for example. So here are the forms of the relative pronoun. First, in the singular, has, he, ha. You'll recognize that is very similar to the nominative singular of the definite article, which would be ha, he, ta. And then with all of the other forms, in the genitive, dative, and accusative cases, you'll notice that you could put a tau in front of these and they would be the definite article forms that you're used to. Of course, the accents are different. There's the rough breathing throughout, so it's who, hes, who. But again, if you're just looking at the letters, we haven't stressed looking at accents terribly much in this class, then you should be able to recognize these relatively quickly. And then for the plural forms, you'll notice that these are even closer than to those definite article forms. Hoi, hai, ha. And so we just are beginning to familiarize ourselves and make connections with the information we've previously learned. So here are some examples of relative clauses. The first is ha aner, has elthen, apotes comes, ekeruxe tan lagan. And so you'll notice that in bold, I've highlighted a relative pronoun, which creates a relative clause, has elthen apotes comes. So this is a clause, it's sort of like an adjectival clause that's modifying ha aner, or the man. And so we would translate this as the man who came from the village preached the word. So that whole clause, has elthen apotes comes, is modifying, it's specifying, it's telling us which man preached the word. All right, here is a second example of a relative clause. Akuomen ton logon hon he thugater su lege. Once again, hon here is indicating a relative clause. So hon he thugater su lege. That whole clause, and it's a clause because it has its own subject and verb, right, are modifying logon. So which words did we hear? Well, we heard the words that your daughter was speaking. We would translate it, we are hearing the words which your daughter speaks. This is an example of the case changing by attraction. So hon technically should be in the accusative case because it is the direct object of lege. So what does your daughter say? Well, she says words. But because of attraction, it is actually in the genitive case. So masculine plural genitive because its antecedent is ton logon. Okay, another example. Poies ha uk existin en to sabato. So again, ha indicates a relative pronoun, and what follows is the clause. So ha uk existing in to sabato is that relative clause. And so we would translate this as, you are doing that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath, or you are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. And so that whole relative clause is the direct object of that verb poies. So what are you doing? Well, whatever that thing you're doing is, it is that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. So that whole phrase is functioning as the direct object of poies. There are a few other particular uses of the relative pronoun that Croy covers, and I just want to briefly review these and encourage you to note these uses and where they occur in Croy, but really the basic use of the relative pronoun that we just reviewed is more important than this slide. So the first are called conditional relative pronouns. And essentially, this is when you take a relative pronoun and you add aon or on, right, which are indications of the subjunctive, of the mood of possibility. So that's why we can talk about these as conditional. It may not happen, right, in the mood of possibility. So we would translate these as whoever or whichever. And here's an example. So has eon epe kata tu pneumatas eleusitai eis krisen. So has eon epe kata tu pneumatas is the subject. That whole long clause is the subject of the verb eleusitai. But has eon gives us a conditional sense. It may or may not be a reality. And so we would translate this as whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will come into judgment. The second sort of special use of the relative pronoun is what is known as the indefinite relative pronouns. Here, this is where we would add the relative pronoun and tis together. And again, we have the translation of whoever. And here is an example. Hostis thele akaluthen moi ophele pistuein. And we would translate that as, whoever wishes to follow me must believe. And so this is an indefinite. It's not saying the boy who desires to follow me must believe, but it's saying whoever, whatever relative person out there, whoever could ever possibly desire to follow me, this is what they must do. They must believe. All right, finally for this lesson, the verb oida. This is a weird verb, and in these final chapters in Croy's textbook, we will encounter lots of weird verbs. And so this is a weird verb because oida is technically the perfect form of another verb, but it has come to have a present tense meaning. So we would translate oida as I know. So the imperfect meaning, when we're talking about an event, a progressive event in the past for the imperfect, is actually technically the pluperfect form. And it's eiden, edes, and so forth. And we would translate this as I was knowing, or something like that. And then the subjunctive forms are edo, edes, and so forth. And really what you need to know, most importantly, beyond recognizing oida and its basic forms, is that section 338 will provide a full conjugation of this verb. And so if you can remember maybe just the first person singular of the of oida as well as the imperfect and maybe the subjunctive, you will hopefully have enough information to go to the conjugation in section 338 as you encounter these verbs in the exercises and in the New Testament. All right, so I do want to get started with one of the practice and review exercises. And so it reads, Pu hupages didaskale, ti didaskes kai tis akaluthe soi en te hodo tes aletheas. Now the first thing that you really want to notice is a semicolon at the end. So you know that this is a question mark, and that this is a series actually of questions in Greek. And so to review what we've introduced in this lesson, you'll notice that there are a few interrogative pronouns. So first of all, ti, like as in ti didasques, we would translate what. And tis, as in tis akaluthe, we would translate who. And so with that, the context also helps us to know that the vocative form of didaskale is being used. And this is indicated by the second singular verb, hupages. So we know we're talking to, that the sentence is talking directly to another person, to the didaskale, and that's why the vocative is used. And so with that, some basic information, we can work on a translation. And so we would translate this as, where are you going, teacher? What are you teaching? And who is following you in the way of truth? In each case, what and who, these are interrogative pronouns that are used in this sentence. Well, that is the end of our lecture on Lesson 27. Thank you for your attention.